So our first speaker is Lorraine Johnson, and she is the Chief Executive Officer of LymeDisease.org. She is an expert in patient-centered big data. She has published over 40 peer-reviewed journal articles and has spoken at government and scientific conferences throughout the world. She served on the executive committee of PCORNet, the big data project of the U.S. Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and she participated last year in the White House Precision Medicine Conference. She has led the team in creating the MyLymeData project, and she is the explainer-in-chief of all things related to MyLymeData. So, Lorraine, time to explain.
Let's see, I'm a little bit shorter, so there we go. So good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for coming. I just wanted to add to that lovely introduction, Dorothy, that I became involved with Lyme disease about 15 years ago when I contracted it and became a reluctant volunteer. So I'm really happy to be here today to be talking to you for the first of what I hope will be many conferences on MyLymeData. And I'm going to talk to you today about where Lyme disease research is and our big data project, MyLymeData, why we need it, what it is intended to accomplish, why I think it can accelerate research in Lyme disease, and then I'm going to share some preliminary results that we're just beginning to pull together. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about LymeDisease.org so that you can place us in context and see why we launched MyLymeData. So there are a lot of Lyme disease advocacy groups doing important work for the community. Some raise money that's redistributed to researchers to help fund the research that we need. Others are involved in legislative action and educational conferences. LymeDisease.org has taken a slightly different path. We were founded in 1989, so a long time ago. We're one of the oldest Lyme organizations, and we were founded as a grassroots organization. And we're all about empowering people. And here's a good definition of empowerment that was put forth in a recent book that's endorsed actually by a lot of government agencies. Empowerment is a group-based participatory process through which marginalized or oppressed individuals gain greater control, acquire valued resources and basic rights, and achieve important life goals and reduced societal marginalization. So LymeDisease.org empowers patients by providing them with tools that educate, like our website, the Lyme Times, and our Symptom Checklist, tools that give patients voice, like our large-scale surveys, which have been published in medical journals, or voter voice, which gives patients political power to affect legislative action effectively. And now MyLymeData, which allows patients to pool their healthcare data to help find a cure. I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about our educational tools that provide patients with information that they need to navigate this illness and create change. And we do this through our blogs and news information on our website, which draws millions of unique visitors every year. And Dorothy Leland, who introduced me, heads our communications, and she likes to say that we are the Huffington Post of Lyme disease. And thanks to her, we are. We also publish the Lyme Times. Our founder, Phyllis, started publishing the Lyme Times about 25 years ago by taking and writing articles on a sheet of paper, folding it in half, and mailing it out to her small community in Ukiah. It's now distributed around the world. And just recently, we started providing the Lyme Times digitally so that patients can read it anytime, anywhere, even on their cell phones. So if you're looking for information about Lyme disease and its co-infections, I encourage you to take a look at the Lyme Times. We now have over 25 years of issues written by researchers, physicians, and patients. And we're the largest library of information available for Lyme patients. Another tool that we developed that's particularly useful right now during spring is our Symptom Checklist, and this helps people to determine if they might have Lyme disease and provides a handy printout that they can share with their physicians about their exposure and their symptoms. It helps patients get diagnosed earlier. So everything I've talked about so far is about empowering patients with knowledge. But around 10 years ago, we began to think that there was a strong need for patients to start getting involved in what is known as science-based advocacy. And we thought we would use our patient empowerment work to help do that. So let me tell you why this focus on science-based advocacy is so important in Lyme disease. I'm sure a lot of you know that Lyme disease, particularly chronic Lyme disease, is a research disadvantaged disease. But this chart, which was in an article by Goswami, really shows the extent of the problem. It shows how large the research gap is between Lyme disease and other infectious diseases based on clinical trials that are listed on clinicaltrials.gov. And as you can see, the research base for HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, and tuberculosis are relatively robust, but for Lyme disease, research funding has been almost non-existent. Only 3 small clinical trials on the treatment of chronic Lyme disease have been funded by the NIH. So there has been very little NIH-funded research. And the fact is that, as a general matter, 51% of infectious disease trials are funded by industry. But we've had no interest from industry in Lyme disease. And there are, with rare exceptions, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One of the reasons is that the CDC drastically underestimated the number of cases and said we had 30,000 cases a year when in fact we had 300,000. And the other reason is that most of the treatments for Lyme disease have been for using generic antibiotics. And generic antibiotics just aren't very profitable for industry, so they haven't been very interested. And here's another thing that you might not have realized, and that's that the last NIH trial for the treatment of chronic Lyme disease was funded over 15 years ago. That's a long time ago, and there's nothing in the pipeline. Now, you might think the answer is to simply bring in some more traditional trials for Lyme disease, but as Rob Califf, who until recently headed the FDA, is fond of saying, traditional trials are great, but they take too long, they cost too much, and they don't apply to most people. And I want to show you how this plays out in Lyme disease. So this table shows the NIH trials that have been done on chronic Lyme treatment. And notice how small they are, ranging from 37 to 129 people. And look at how selective these trials are. Klempner, for example, screened over 1,900 patients to enroll just 129, and this took him over 3 years. So it took him a long time, it cost a lot, and it screened out 93% of the patients who were interested. One thing you know about that sample is it doesn't include normal patients like you or me. And the sad thing about these trials is that they're just destined to fail, because the fact of the matter is that you need large samples in order to demonstrate subgroups. In any trial, there will be people who respond to treatment, there will be people who don't respond to treatment, but you have to have a large enough sample size in order to be able to show that. And so that's one of the reasons why we started moving towards big data. And as Gordon Guyatt at McMaster's University, a key voice in evidence-based medicine, explains, to detect small to moderate treatment effects necessitates sample sizes in the thousands. So we're not going to get the answers we need by focusing on small trials right now. And you know, you have to have data to make change. So like Deming says, in God we trust, all others bring data. But this is just a catch-22 for Lyme, because the research just hasn't been done. And the fact is that patients need more than hope. They need data. So what are you going to do? Well, about 10 years ago, when we decided to expand our grassroots advocacy efforts, we started collecting patient data, conducting big surveys of Lyme patients. 2 of our surveys have been published in medical journals, and both surveys drew responses from over 2,500 people, so you can see right away we're talking about really large groups of people, especially when you compare them to the NIH trials. And these 2 articles were about access to care and quality of life for Lyme patients. Too many patients can't find physicians, and when they can, they can't afford the care that's not covered by insurance. And they have a lousy quality of life. Many are unable to work or function. So if you're looking for published statistics like co-infections prevalence among those with chronic Lyme disease, disability, years to diagnosis, symptom severity, healthcare utilization, cost of illness, and so forth, I encourage you to take a look at these 2 publications. We packed a lot of data in them. And let me share with you a couple of charts and talk about how this type of data can be used with healthcare policy change. So these charts are from the Access to Care study. Before we conducted this study, everybody in the community was saying that it takes too long to diagnose. They were saying that it takes too long to diagnose, but we had no data to really show this. And opinions and anecdotes really just don't carry weight in healthcare policy. And what the survey showed was that most people with chronic Lyme had seen 10 or more physicians before they were diagnosed, and most patients were not diagnosed for 2 years. So that's well beyond the window where we know that early treatment might be more effective. And this is the type of data that you can take to your legislators to help drive change. And here's another example. The community talks about how sick Lyme patients are, but some experts outside the community say that patients simply suffer the aches and pains of daily living. Well, which is it? We use standard government questions, ones used by the CDC and the NIH, to actually measure quality of life. And the question is very simple. It asks you to rate your health as excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. And what we found was that 72% of the patients in this survey had fair or poor quality of life. And that compares to only 16% in the general population. So you see right away that the quality of life here is really quite noticeably impacted. And it shows that Lyme patients have a poor quality of life. In fact, it shows that they have a poor quality of life than those with congestive heart failure. And these findings conform with other studies. So there are actually 2 other studies that show this type of impairment on quality of life. And when you start getting multiple data sources pointing to the same issue, you have some really powerful data to take to a legislator. So how does quality of life affect ability to work? Most patients in MyLymeData report that they have had to stop working, reduce their work hours, or change the nature of their work at some point in their illness. And that means that many patients have a serious functional impairment. So now you have some data, and you've gone through peer review, and you've published the data. What do you do with that? Well, if it's data that's relevant to healthcare policy, you can use it to inform your legislators and help pass legislation. In Massachusetts, for example, they handed out our publications to legislators. They used statistics in the publication to argue for legislated insurance coverage, and I prepared for them a chart book on a PowerPoint that they kept running on a continuous loop during the entire legislative session. And then we stepped in with Voter Voice, which is a legislative empowerment tool, and it allows patients to easily contact their legislators. And we worked with the people on the ground and were able to give very quick, very dynamically timed messages to the community to get them to contact their legislators with the right message at the right time in a quickly changing legislative environment. And Dorothy Leland spent a lot of time on that, and we're very grateful for that. And this is what is known as science-based advocacy. We're empowering patients to use their data to drive change. And we've also used a Voter Voice to help pass the 21st Century Cures legislation, which had lots of different provisions, but the one that we cared about was that it put in place a Lyme panel that will finally give patients a voice on affecting the grants that are given out for research. So our surveys in the past have helped us to gather data to inform healthcare policymakers, but they don't address the fundamental question that patients care about, which is, what can I do to get better? So we decided to take it one step further. And we launched the first national patient registry in Lyme disease. MyLymeData empowers patients to pool their data and determine what works and what doesn't work. The study has been approved under an independent review board, and all of the patients are fully consented. And we paid particular attention to privacy and security of the data because these are really heightened concerns in the Lyme community. And we expect MyLymeData to gather more data about Lyme disease than any other research study has done. We have enrolled over 7,300 patients, which puts us in the top 10% of patient registries in the nation. And our goal is to enroll 10,000. If you're not enrolled in MyLymeData, or if you know someone with Lyme disease who's not enrolled, whether they're sick or well, we need information on everybody. I encourage you to join today. And this is how we're going to make change happen for Lyme patients. And I think it's remarkable how fast MyLymeData has grown. As one patient told us, when I was at my sickest, I couldn't do much, but I could do this. We launched phase 1 in November of 2015, and in November of 2016, we launched phase 2. So phase 1 gathers information about tick exposure, diagnosis, symptoms, treatment work status, disability, and healthcare usage. Phase 2 adds a 3-month follow-up, and that allows us to start tracking patients' progress in connection with specific treatments. We also added genetic testing, medical history, family history of Lyme disease. We want to know if other members in the family have Lyme disease. And finally, we added a decedent survey to collect information about patients who are deceased. If somebody with Lyme disease has died, we want to know what was the cause of death. And remember how Rob Califf said, traditional trials are great, but they take too long, cost too much, and don't apply to most people. Well, here's the great thing about patient registries. They're uniquely suited for enrolling diverse patient populations, so now everybody who has been diagnosed with Lyme disease can actually participate. They allow you to evaluate care as it's actually provided in real-world practice, so what the clinician is doing with a patient. They allow you to assess complex treatment patterns, so you can actually take a look at combination treatments, and they allow you to evaluate patient outcomes when clinical trials are not practical. And I asked a researcher one time, how come all of our NIH trials, none of them go beyond 90 days? And the answer was, it's not practical. So, using tools like MyLymeData, you can actually track people over a much longer period of time, and it's not an expensive process to go through. So this is real-world research that applies to real patients. And I believe the MyLymeData registry is a game changer in terms of research, not only because it's of the data that it's collecting, but also because it's going to be part of a big research engine. And this cycle shows how it works. You launch a patient registry, and then you start to bring in biospecimen repository data. You use that data to start conducting natural history studies, identify clinical endpoints that might be relevant in a study, to help researchers shape trial hypotheses, and then to help recruit patients for clinical trials, and if the trial is successful, to help push through the approval of the particular medication through the FDA approval process, and then you can do post-treatment follow-up over longer periods of time. MyLymeData is also patient-centered. It was conceived by patients, is run by patients, and will address issues that patients care about. It is part of the patient-centered research movement, which transforms the traditional research hierarchy in which studies are conducted on passive patients or subjects into a partnership model where patients are working actively with researchers to try to find a cure. And here are some of the ways that patients can be involved in research. In patient-centered research, they can help define research questions. They can partner with researchers on a research proposal. We've done that. They can help review grants and provide input into the study's concept and design, and they can help with recruitment for clinical trials. So there's lots of ways that patients can be involved in research, but right now I'm going to focus on patients helping to define the research questions that are important to them. And there's a growing recognition among government funding agencies and other funding agencies that research that's funded should be research that patients value because patients are the ultimate end user of healthcare. Just around the time we launched MyLymeData, we started working with a number of other groups, including Kristen Honey at the White House, to put together an event with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And roughly 50 advocates, researchers, clinicians gathered together to work in groups and put together a preliminary list of potential research questions. And these questions were then submitted to patients who are enrolled in MyLymeData, and we asked them to rank the importance of the questions, and also, if they thought that there was a question that should have been on the list but wasn't on the list, to add that question. At the end, we ended up with 25 questions that we then submitted to the community at large. Everybody in this room was invited through the internet to participate in that. We had over 7,000 patients, researchers, physicians, and advocacy groups participate. So this was a very broad, inclusive process that we used to determine the top 10 research priorities. And it's probably one of the most robust processes that have been done in to determine the top 10 research questions. So today I'm going to share with you the preliminary results of this process, the research questions that made the top 10. And you can see the Lyme community is interested in direct diagnostic tests, the most effective treatment protocols, what's the impact of delayed diagnosis, what natural therapies might be helpful, what's the relationship between Parkinson's, MLS, and Lyme, how do you rehabilitate the brain, why do some people develop chronic Lyme disease while others don't, what sort of triggers reactivate chronic Lyme disease that's been in remission, how do co-infections, what role do they play, and then also whether tailored treatments would make a difference based on people's symptoms. So we've been gathering information on MyLyme data for a while, and some of these questions we actually have data on. And some of them we've released, questions 3 and 4, we released some preliminary data on that, and today I'm going to talk about question 5 in particular. So we presented information on question 3 at the ILADS conference and at the Columbia LDA conference last November. Question 3 asks, what is the impact of delayed diagnosis on the course of Lyme disease? And when we compared patients in MyLyme data who were diagnosed late compared to those who were diagnosed early, patients whose diagnosis was early were 280% more likely to report being well. But the other thing that we found was that even with early diagnosis, far too many patients were failing treatment. We also did some preliminary analysis on some of the data on neurologic diseases like MS and Parkinson's that are often part of a misdiagnosis picture. And what we found was that 70% of the patients in MyLyme data report that they were initially misdiagnosed. This is with any condition, could be fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, depression. But 20% of their misdiagnosis was with a neurologic disease, 14% with MS, and 2% with other neurologic diseases like ALS, Parkinson's, and multiple systems atrophy. So if you're interested in more information on these last 2 questions, I've posted blogs on them on Lyme Policy Wonk, and I encourage you to get more details there. The final question that we included in the top 10 that I'd like to discuss today deals with alternative therapies, and specifically the question asks, what natural therapies or protocols are the most effective? And you know, we get a lot of questions about this, but a threshold question that you have to ask when you're looking at, alternative treatments is, well, how many people are using them? We always hear that everybody is on antibiotics, but that's not the case. It was close to a 50-50 split between those who use antibiotics and those who don't. 31% reported that they use antibiotics, but they also use alternative treatments. And around 16% of patients were not using either alternative therapies or antibiotics. There were many reasons why people weren't using antibiotics. About 30% said that they couldn't find a treating physician. 20% pointed to insurance constraints. But another 20% said that they weren't working for them, and others said that they simply preferred alternative treatments. So what alternative treatments are the most popular? Well, by far the most popular are herbal protocols, and many of them have antimicrobial properties, so that's not surprising. And this was followed by detox, homeopathy, acupuncture, sauna, colloidal silver, and so forth. And you might note the treatment at the very bottom, stem cell therapy, which 331 people in the registry had tried. I was personally surprised that we had 331 people, probably the most people who've ever had data collected on them that had stem cell therapy in connection with Lyme disease. And we asked people who are taking alternative treatments to tell us whether they were very effective, moderately effective, not effective, or whether they were unsure. So 2 things to note here. The most effective at the top is the herbal protocols, which are also the most popular. And the least effective was the stem cell. Only 3% of the 331 patients who used stem cells said that they were effective in treating their Lyme disease. The rest either said that they were unsure or that the treatment was not effective. And remember, stem cell treatment has been very expensive, inconvenient. It often involves, large travel distances, and it's invasive in terms of procedures. So if I were a patient trying to decide which alternative treatments to try, I would want to know this type of information. And this last chart shows the side effect profile of different alternative treatments. A lot of people think that alternative treatments are natural and that they don't have side effects, but they do. So here we have the percentage of people reporting moderate or severe side effects for different treatments. And detox had the most reported side effects, and by the way, was the second most popular treatment and the third most effective. Rife was tied in terms of having the most side effects and was not reported by many patients to be effective. 69% reported it was either not effective or that they were unsure. And not surprisingly, it was not very popular. So treatment decisions, whether we're talking about antibiotics or alternative treatments, always involve benefit-risk trade-offs, and they vary with different people. But knowing how other patients have responded to an alternative treatment is an important piece of information. And let me conclude by saying that we are looking for patients, researchers, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, and clinicians to join us in this effort. 7,300 patients have enrolled. Our goal is 10,000. If you have Lyme disease or you know someone with Lyme disease, please encourage them to enroll. We need everyone on the bus, people who are sick, people who are well. And we believe that MyLymeData will be the largest study of Lyme and chronic Lyme disease ever conducted. We ask you to join us in this effort. Thank you.